The bullet missed Rebecca Allen's head by inches, splintering the wooden post behind her as she dove behind a water trough in the dusty street of Centralia, Kansas, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. It was the summer of 1878, and the heat bore down mercilessly on the small Kansas town that had seen better days. Rebecca pressed herself against the rough wood, her dark auburn hair falling loose from its pins, her simple calico dress already covered in dust and grime. She could hear shouting, the thunder of hooves and more gunfire erupting from somewhere near the bank. Another robbery. The third one this month. She had come into town for supplies, nothing more. After 3 years of running her late father's ranch alone, she had learned to time her visits carefully, to keep her head down, to avoid trouble. But trouble had found her anyway. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Rebecca waited, counting her breaths, listening to the retreating hoofbeats fade into the distance. Slowly, cautiously, she lifted her head above the trough. "Madam, you hurt." A deep voice startled her, and she spun around to find a tall man standing a few feet away, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a cowboy, a worn hat shading his face from the brutal sun. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and there was genuine concern in them. "I am fine," Rebecca said, her voice shakier than she would have liked. She stood, brushing off her dress with trembling hands, just startled. The man nodded, lowering his hands. "Name's Jacob Jensen. I just rode into town about an hour ago. Seems I picked a hell of a time to arrive." "Rebecca Allen," she replied automatically, then caught herself. She did not usually give her name so freely to strangers, but something about this man seemed different. Trustworthy, maybe, though she had learned the hard way not to trust her instincts when it came to people. "Those men get away?" Jacob asked, looking down the street where the outlaws had disappeared in a cloud of dust. "They always do," Rebecca said bitterly. "The sheriff is too old and too scared to go after them, and there is nobody else willing to stand up to the Crawford gang." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Crawford gang? That would be Billy Crawford and his brothers. You know them, know of them." "I have been tracking them for the better part of 6 months." Jacob turned back to her, and Rebecca saw something hard and determined in his expression. "They killed a good man up in Nebraska, a rancher who gave me work when I needed it most. I aim to see them answer for it." Rebecca felt a chill despite the heat. "Then you are either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Jensen. That gang has at least 8 men, all of them mean as rattlesnakes and twice as quick." "Maybe both," Jacob said, and there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. "But I did not ride all this way to turn back now." The sheriff emerged from his office, a portly man with a gray mustache and nervous eyes. He looked at the damage, the broken bank window, the splintered wood, and shook his head. "Anybody hurt?" he called out. "No, Sheriff Hansen," someone answered. "They took about $200 and rode out fast." Jacob watched the sheriff with obvious disappointment. Rebecca could see the judgment in his eyes, and she could not blame him. She had lost respect for Sheriff Hansen herself a long time ago. "I should get my supplies and head home," Rebecca said, suddenly aware that she was still standing there talking to this stranger. "Thank you for checking on me, Mr. Jensen." "Let me help you," Jacob offered. "Streets might not be safe for a woman alone right now." Rebecca wanted to refuse. She had been alone for 3 years, managing just fine without anyone's help. But something made her nod, and together they walked toward the general store. She was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the easy way he moved, the alertness in his eyes as he scanned the street. Inside the store, the proprietor, Mr. Watts, was still shaken from the robbery. "Miss Allen," he greeted her. "Glad to see you are all right. Those devils nearly killed poor Mrs. Patterson. She was in the bank when they came in, and one of them shoved her so hard she fell and hit her head." "Is she badly hurt?" Rebecca asked with concern. "Doc Morrison is with her now. Should be fine, but it is a terrible thing. This town used to be safe." Rebecca gathered her supplies with Jacob's help, loading flour, coffee, beans, and other necessities into her basket. She was conscious of her limited funds, counting carefully. The ranch barely turned a profit these days. Without her father's knowledge and connections, she struggled to get fair prices for her cattle, and some of the neighboring ranchers had made it clear they thought a woman had no business running a spread. As they loaded the supplies into her wagon outside, Jacob said, "You mentioned a ranch." "You run it yourself?" "I do," Rebecca said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "My father died 3 years ago. Fever took him quick. It was just the two of us, and the ranch is all I have." "Must be hard work," Jacob said, and there was no judgment in his tone, only respect. "It is. But I manage." Rebecca secured the last of her supplies and turned to face him. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Jensen. I hope you find what you are looking for with the Crawford gang." Jacob seemed about to say something, then hesitated. Finally, he said, "Where is your ranch, Miss Allen?" "About 5 miles north of town." "Why?" "I am going to need a place to stay while I am tracking Crawford. The boarding house is full, according to Mrs. Palmer. I can pay for room and board, and I can work. I am good with horses and cattle, and I can fix just about anything that needs fixing." Rebecca's first instinct was to refuse. She had lived alone for 3 years, and the thought of having a stranger on her property made her nervous. But she looked at Jacob Jensen, really looked at him, and saw only honesty in his face. And heaven knew she could use the help. The barn roof needed repairs before winter, and several sections of fence were down. "I do not have much," she said slowly. "The bunkhouse is empty but needs cleaning. I can provide meals, but they will be simple, and I cannot pay you beyond room and board." "That is all I need," Jacob said. "I will stay out of your way, Miss Allen. You have my word." Rebecca nodded, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. "Follow me then. It is a bit of a ride." The journey to her ranch took them through rolling prairie, the grass golden in the late summer heat. Jacob rode a sturdy buckskin horse, and Rebecca drove her wagon, the two of them traveling in companionable silence. She found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way he sat his horse with natural ease, the way his eyes never stopped moving, always alert. The Allen Ranch appeared on the horizon, a small collection of buildings that had seen better days. The main house was a simple structure her father had built when he first claimed the land 20 years ago. The barn was larger, sturdy, but in need of repair. A few outbuildings dotted the property, and corrals held a modest herd of cattle. "It is not much," Rebecca said as they approached, suddenly seeing her home through a stranger's eyes. "But it is mine." "It is a good piece of land," Jacob observed. "Water," a creek runs through the north section. "It has never gone dry, even in the worst droughts." They pulled up in front of the house, and Jacob dismounted to help Rebecca down from the wagon. His hands were strong and calloused as they briefly touched her waist, and Rebecca felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She stepped away quickly, confused by her own reaction. "The bunkhouse is over there," she said, pointing to a small building near the barn. "Like I said, it needs cleaning, but the roof is sound. I will get you some bedding and supplies." "I would appreciate that," Jacob said. "But first, let me help you unload this wagon." Together they carried the supplies into the house. Rebecca's home was simple but clean, with worn furniture and faded curtains. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a sturdy table sat in the center of the main room. It was the home of someone who had little but took care of what she had. Jacob noticed a photograph on the mantel, a stern-looking man with kind eyes. "Your father?" "Yes, Thomas Allen. He was a good man." Rebecca's voice softened. "He taught me everything about running this place. I just wish he had lived long enough to see me do it on my own." "I think he would be proud," Jacob said quietly. Rebecca felt unexpected tears prick her eyes and turned away quickly. She was not used to kindness, to someone seeing her efforts and acknowledging them. "I will get those supplies for the bunkhouse," she said, her voice brisk. Over the next few hours they worked together to make the bunkhouse habitable. Rebecca swept away years of dust and cobwebs while Jacob repaired a broken window and fixed a wobbly chair. By the time the sun was setting, the small building looked almost welcoming. "I will make some supper," Rebecca said. "Come up to the house when you are ready." Alone in her kitchen, Rebecca tried to calm her racing thoughts. What had she been thinking, inviting a strange man to stay on her property? She knew nothing about Jacob Jensen except what he had told her. He could be lying about everything. He could be dangerous. But when he knocked on her door 20 minutes later, cleaned up and polite, those fears seemed foolish. They sat at her table and ate a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. The conversation was halting at first, but gradually they began to talk more easily. Jacob told her about his life, growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, even spent a year working for the railroad. "I have been moving from place to place for 10 years now," he said. "Never really put down roots anywhere." "That sounds lonely," Rebecca said softly. "It is," Jacob admitted, "but I never found a reason to stay anywhere, not until—" He trailed off, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. Rebecca stood abruptly, gathering the dishes. "I should clean up. Morning comes early on a ranch." "Let me help," Jacob offered, but she shook her head. "You have done enough for today. Get some rest, Mr. Jensen. Tomorrow I will show you around the property and we can figure out what needs doing most urgently." After Jacob left, Rebecca stood at her window and watched him walk back to the bunkhouse, his figure outlined against the darkening sky. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart beat too fast. What was happening to her? She had been alone for so long, content with her solitude. Now this stranger had appeared, and suddenly her carefully ordered world felt shaken. The next morning, Rebecca woke before dawn as always. She dressed in her work clothes, practical trousers and a shirt that had belonged to her father, and went out to start her chores. She was surprised to find Jacob already in the barn, mucking out stalls. "You are up early," she said. "Old habits," Jacob replied. "I have been waking with the sun for most of my life." They worked together in the cool morning air, falling into an easy rhythm. Jacob was true to his word about being good with animals. He handled her horses with gentle confidence, and even her most skittish mare, Rosie, seemed to trust him immediately. "You have a way with them," Rebecca observed as Jacob calmed Rosie with a soft touch and quiet words. "Animals are honest," Jacob said. "They do not lie or betray you. If you treat them right, they will do the same." "I wish more people were like that," Rebecca said before she could stop herself. Jacob looked at her with understanding in his eyes. "You have been hurt." It was not a question. Rebecca turned away, focusing on her work. "It does not matter. That was a long time ago." But as the morning progressed, Rebecca found herself telling Jacob about it anyway, about Martin Fletcher, the neighboring rancher's son who had courted her before her father died. How he had promised to marry her, to help her keep the ranch running. How he had disappeared the moment he learned that her father had left debts, that the ranch was struggling. "I was such a fool," Rebecca said bitterly. "I actually believed he loved me. But he only wanted the land, and when he learned there was nothing to gain, he could not leave fast enough." "He was the fool," Jacob said quietly. "Any man who could not see your worth does not deserve you." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. She was not used to such direct compliments. "Well, it taught me an important lesson. I do not need anyone. I can take care of myself." "Being able to take care of yourself and being alone are two different things," Jacob said. "One is strength, the other is just sad." His words struck something deep inside her, but Rebecca pushed the feeling away. She had built walls around her heart for good reasons, and she was not about to let them down now. Over the following days, Jacob proved invaluable around the ranch. He repaired the barn roof, fixed the broken fences, and even helped Rebecca move her cattle to better grazing land. But more than his physical help, it was his presence that began to change things. The ranch felt different with him there, less empty, less lonely. They fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were for the heavy work, caring for the animals and maintaining the property. Afternoons were often spent working side by side, and evenings found them sharing meals at Rebecca's table, talking about everything and nothing. Jacob told her stories about his years on the trail, about towns he had seen and people he had met. Rebecca found herself laughing more than she had in years, and sometimes she would catch Jacob watching her with a soft expression that made her pulse quicken. But Jacob never forgot his purpose. He made regular trips into Centralia, always alert for news of the Crawford gang. The outlaws had hit 2 more towns since the Centralia robbery, always moving, always one step ahead of the law. One evening, about 2 weeks after Jacob had arrived, he returned from town with grim news. "Crawford hit a stagecoach outside of Abilene yesterday, killed the driver and a passenger." Rebecca felt cold. "This has to stop. Why does nobody go after them?" "Because they are smart and they are ruthless," Jacob said. "They never hit the same area twice in a row, and they have hideouts scattered across 3 territories. Anyone who gets close to them ends up dead." "Then what are you going to do?" Rebecca asked, and she was surprised by the fear in her own voice. The thought of Jacob going after these dangerous men made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I do not know yet," Jacob admitted, "but I am getting closer. I have been talking to people, piecing together their patterns. I think I know where they might strike next." "Jacob," Rebecca said, using his first name without thinking. "Is revenge really worth dying for?" He looked at her for a long moment. "It is not just revenge anymore," he said quietly. "These men are terrorizing innocent people. Someone has to stop them. But why does it have to be you?" "Because I am the only one willing to try." Rebecca wanted to argue, to tell him that his life was worth more than this dangerous mission. But she had no right. He had only been here 2 weeks. He was not hers to worry about, not hers to keep safe. That night, Rebecca lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She thought about Jacob in the bunkhouse, about how much she had come to rely on his presence, his strength, his quiet companionship. She thought about how empty the ranch would feel when he left, and he would leave. Of course he would. He had been clear from the start that he was only staying temporarily. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was falling in love with him. No, that was impossible. She barely knew him. It had only been 2 weeks, but her heart did not care about logic or sense. Her heart knew what it wanted, and it wanted Jacob Jensen. Rebecca turned over, burying her face in her pillow. She could not do this. She could not let herself love someone who was going to leave. She had learned that lesson already. Better to keep her distance, to protect her heart. But the next morning, when Jacob smiled at her over breakfast, all her resolutions crumbled. She was powerless against the warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice. A few days later, disaster struck. Rebecca was out checking the fence line in the north pasture when she heard frantic lowing. She rode toward the sound and found one of her cows stuck in a muddy section near the creek, struggling and panicking. Rebecca dismounted and waded into the mud, trying to calm the animal and work it free. But the cow was heavy and frightened, and the mud was deep. Rebecca felt herself sinking, the sticky mud pulling at her boots. She grabbed the cow's halter, trying to guide it to firmer ground, but her feet slipped and she fell hard, going down into the mud. She tried to stand, but her ankle gave way with a sharp spike of pain. The cow, finally working itself free, scrambled out of the mud and trotted away, leaving Rebecca stuck and hurting. "Help!" she called out, but she was too far from the house for anyone to hear. She tried again to stand, but the pain in her ankle was excruciating, and the mud had her boots trapped. Time passed slowly. Rebecca felt panic rising in her chest. She was stuck, hurt, and alone. This was how people died, from simple accidents in remote places where no one would find them in time. Then she heard hoofbeats and Jacob's voice calling her name. "Rebecca! Rebecca, where are you?" "Here," she shouted. "By the creek." Jacob appeared on his horse moments later. He took one look at the situation and dismounted, wading into the mud without hesitation. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Rebecca said, and she hated how weak her voice sounded. "I think it might be broken." Jacob moved quickly, wrapping his arms around her and lifting her out of the sucking mud. He was strong, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, and Rebecca found herself clinging to him, her face pressed against his chest. She could hear his heart beating fast, feel the solid warmth of him. He carried her to solid ground and gently set her down. "Let me see," he said, carefully removing her boot. Rebecca winced as pain shot through her ankle. Jacob's hands were gentle as he examined it. "I do not think it is broken," he said finally, "but it is a bad sprain. You need to stay off it for at least a week, maybe 2. "I cannot," Rebecca protested. "There is too much work to do." "I will do the work," Jacob said firmly. "You are going back to the house and you are going to rest." "Jacob, I cannot ask you to run the entire ranch by yourself." "You are not asking. I am telling you." His voice was gentle but unyielding. He lifted her again, this time settling her on his horse before mounting behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and Rebecca leaned back against him, too tired and hurting to protest further. Back at the house, Jacob carried her inside and settled her on her bed. "I am going to get Doc Morrison from town," he said. "That is not necessary. You said yourself it is just a sprain. I want to be sure." Jacob looked down at her, and the concern in his eyes made Rebecca's throat tight. "When I realized you were missing when I could not find you." He stopped, shaking his head. "Just let me get the doctor, Rebecca. Please." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Doc Morrison confirmed Jacob's diagnosis. It was a bad sprain but not a break. He wrapped Rebecca's ankle tightly and left instructions for her to rest and keep it elevated. "No weight on it for at least 10 days, Miss Allen," he said sternly. "I know that is hard for someone like you, always working, but you will only make it worse if you do not let it heal properly." After the doctor left, Jacob brought her soup and water. "I am going to finish the evening chores," he said. "You rest. I will check on you later." Rebecca watched him leave, feeling helpless and frustrated. She was not used to being taken care of, to depending on someone else. But over the next few days, she had no choice. Jacob did everything, caring for the animals, cooking meals, even cleaning the house. He would bring her breakfast in bed, sit with her in the evenings, read to her from the newspapers he brought from town. "You do not have to do all this," Rebecca said one evening as Jacob sat in the chair beside her bed, reading about political developments in Washington. "I can at least move to the main room, sit at the table." "The doctor said to rest," Jacob reminded her. "Besides, I do not mind." "It is nice having an excuse to sit still for a while." "Do you ever stop moving?" Rebecca asked. In all the time you have been here, I have never seen you truly rest." Jacob was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes distant. "I guess I am afraid that if I stop moving, if I stay in one place too long, I will realize how lonely I have been." Rebecca's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "I have been alone for so long." She breathed the words, barely a whisper. Jacob set down the newspaper and leaned forward, his eyes intense on hers. "You do not have to be alone anymore, Rebecca. Not if you do not want to be." "What are you saying?" Rebecca's heart was pounding. "I am saying that I came here looking for something and I found it. But it was not what I expected." Jacob reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I came here looking for revenge, for justice, but what I found was you and this ranch, and a reason to finally stop running." "But the Crawford gang," Rebecca said. "You said you had to stop them." "I do. But not the way I planned. I went to see Sheriff Hansen yesterday. I told him everything I know about Crawford's patterns, his hideouts, his methods. The sheriff has sent for federal marshals. They will track Crawford down properly with the law behind them." I realized I do not need to be the one to do it. I do not need revenge anymore, I just need. He stopped, looking down at their joined hands. "I need this, you, a home." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. "Jacob, I am scared. I trusted someone before and he left me. I do not think I could survive that again." "I am not Martin Fletcher," Jacob said fiercely. "I see you, Rebecca, not your land, not what you can give me, just you. Your strength, your courage, your kind heart. That is what I want. That is what I am promising you." "Jacob," Rebecca whispered. He leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I promise you, Rebecca Allen, that you will never be alone again. Not if you let me stay, not if you will have me." "Yes," Rebecca breathed. "Yes, I will have you." Jacob closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. Rebecca's hand came up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I love you. I think I started falling for you that first day in Centralia, when you stood up and brushed yourself off after nearly getting shot, so brave and stubborn." Rebecca laughed through her tears. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I cannot help it. You have made me feel alive again, Jacob. You have made me remember what it is like to not be alone." They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, foreheads touching, two lonely people who had finally found their home in each other. The next few weeks were a time of healing in more ways than one. Rebecca's ankle mended slowly, and Jacob continued to run the ranch with impressive skill. But more importantly, their relationship deepened and grew. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Rebecca said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I think we could handle another 50 head if we improve the grazing land." Jacob said, a smile in his voice. "I like how that sounds." Rebecca leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder. "I never thought I would say we about this ranch. I thought it would always be just me, doing everything alone." "Those days are over," Jacob promised. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Rebecca, I want to marry you. I know we should probably wait longer, court properly, but I do not see the point in waiting when I am already sure. Will you marry me?" Rebecca felt joy bloom in her chest, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a month later in Centralia's small church, with Doc Morrison and his wife as witnesses. Rebecca wore a simple blue dress, and Jacob had a new suit that was slightly too tight in the shoulders. It did not matter. What mattered was the look in Jacob's eyes as he said his vows, the strength of his hand holding hers, the promise of forever that hung in the air between them. The Crawford gang was caught 2 weeks after the wedding. Federal marshals tracked them to a hideout in Colorado and arrested them all without a shot being fired. Jacob received a letter from the marshal's office, thanking him for the information that had made the arrest possible. He read it once, then folded it carefully and put it away. "Is that chapter of your life closed now?" Rebecca asked. "It is," Jacob said. "I have a new chapter to focus on now, one that I like a lot better." That winter was the happiest of Rebecca's life. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Jacob's skills complemented hers perfectly, and together they accomplished more than Rebecca had thought possible. They worked hard during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal passion. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new changes as well. Rebecca realized she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Jacob's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "A baby," he breathed, his hand splaying across her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jacob said. He pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been alone for so long, Rebecca. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a child, a family." Their son was born in December of 1879, during the first snow of the season. He was a healthy, loud baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn spirit. They named him Thomas, after Rebecca's father. "He would have loved this," Rebecca said, holding her newborn son and looking at the photograph of her father on the mantel. "He would have loved you, Jacob, and he would have been so proud to have a grandson named after him." "I wish I could have met him," Jacob said, sitting beside her and putting his arm around her shoulders. "But I like to think he had a hand in bringing us together. Maybe he was watching out for you all along." Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. The ranch continued to prosper. Jacob proved to have a knack for business, negotiating better prices for their cattle and making smart investments that increased their profits. They were able to hire 2 ranch hands, young men from town who were eager to learn and hard workers. Rebecca bloomed in her role as wife and mother. She had feared that marriage might mean giving up her independence, losing the ranch she had fought so hard to keep. But Jacob never tried to take over or push her aside. Every decision was made together, every plan discussed and agreed upon. He treated her as an equal partner in all things, and their love only deepened with time. In the summer of 1881, Rebecca gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a quiet, peaceful baby, so different from her boisterous older brother. Thomas, now a year and a half old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. "Gentle Tommy," Jacob would say, showing his son how to carefully touch the baby's tiny hand. "She is very small." Watching Jacob with their children filled Rebecca with an emotion so powerful, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and loving, never too busy to answer Tommy's endless questions or soothe Grace when she cried. He was the father she had always hoped her children would have. One evening in the fall of 1882, Rebecca and Jacob sat on their porch after putting the children to bed. The ranch spread out before them in the golden light of sunset, and Rebecca marveled at how much had changed in the 4 years since Jacob had ridden into her life. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, taking her hand. "How different everything is now," Rebecca said. 4 years ago I was alone. I was barely keeping this place running. I had convinced myself I did not need anyone, that I was fine on my own, And then you arrived and everything changed. I was lost, Jacob said quietly. I had been wandering for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to belong to someone. He turned to her, his blue eyes soft in the fading light. You saved me, Rebecca. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything. We saved each other, Rebecca corrected. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the peace that came from being exactly where she belonged. I was alone for so long, but you promised I would never be alone again. And you kept that promise, Jacob. Every single day you keep that promise. I always will, Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her hair. For the rest of our lives, Rebecca, you will never be alone again. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, their ranch thrived. And between them, the love that had started with a chance meeting in a dusty Kansas town continued to grow stronger with each passing day. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. In 1884, Rebecca gave birth to twin boys, much to everyone's surprise. Jacob and Daniel were identical from the start, with matching grins and an uncanny ability to get into trouble together. 4 children, Jacob said, looking slightly overwhelmed as he held one squirming twin while Rebecca nursed the other. We have 4 children. Having second thoughts, Rebecca teased. Not for a second, Jacob said firmly, though I might need to hire another hand or two. Tommy, now 5 years old, took his role as big brother very seriously. He helped Grace, who was 3, learn her letters and numbers, and he was endlessly fascinated by the twins. Can I teach them to ride when they are bigger? He asked. When they are much bigger, Rebecca said, laughing. The ranch had grown significantly. With the money they had saved and invested wisely, Jacob and Rebecca had purchased additional land from a neighboring rancher who was retiring. They now ran over 300 head of cattle, and the Jensen Ranch was known throughout the county for its quality stock. Rebecca had also started breeding horses, using her natural skill with the animals. Her horses were sought after for their temperament and strength, and she commanded good prices for them. It gave her a sense of pride and accomplishment that had nothing to do with cattle or the traditional ranch work. You are a remarkable woman, Jacob told her one day, watching her work with a young mare. Is there anything you cannot do? I cannot seem to keep our sons out of the mud, Rebecca said wryly, gesturing to where the twins were playing by the water trough, both covered head to toe in dirt. But I am working on it. In 1887, Sheriff Hansen retired, and the town of Centralia held an election for a new sheriff. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Jacob was asked to run. The town had not forgotten how his information had led to the capture of the Crawford gang, and many people felt he was exactly the kind of strong, honest man they needed. Jacob was uncertain. I do not want to leave the ranch, he told Rebecca. This is our home, our life. Being sheriff would take time away from you and the children. Centralia is only 5 miles away, Rebecca pointed out. You could ride in a few days a week, handle what needs handling, and still be home most nights. And Jacob, you would be good at this. You have always had a strong sense of justice, a desire to protect people. This would let you do that. After much discussion and thought, Jacob agreed to run. He won the election by a landslide, and in early 1888 he was sworn in as sheriff of Centralia. He was true to his word about not letting it interfere with his family life. He went into town 3 days a week, handled disputes and minor crimes, and made sure the town stayed safe. The other 4 days he worked the ranch alongside Rebecca. How do you do it? Doc Morrison asked him one day. How do you balance being sheriff, running a ranch, and being a father to 4 children. I married the right woman, Jacob said simply. Rebecca could run the ranch blindfolded if she had to, and our children are growing up strong and capable, learning to help with the work. But mostly, it is about priorities. My family comes first always. Everything else just fits around that. The 1890s brought prosperity but also challenges. A drought in 1893 tested their resources, but they managed to keep most of their herd alive by using every bit of water from their creek and carefully rationing their hay stores. Other ranchers were not so lucky, and Jacob and Rebecca found themselves helping their neighbors, sharing what they could spare. "We have been blessed," Rebecca said when Jacob questioned whether they could afford to be so generous. "We need to help others when we can." Their kindness was not forgotten. When a barn fire threatened their property in 1895, neighbors came from miles around to help fight the flames and save their livestock. The barn was lost, but everything else was saved, and the community came together to help Jacob and Rebecca rebuild. "This is what home really means," Jacob said, watching their neighbors work side by side to raise the new barn. "Not just a place, but people who care about each other." The children grew. Tommy became a serious, thoughtful young man who loved working with the cattle. At 18, he was already taller than his father and had a reputation as one of the best ropers in the county. Grace was 16 and had inherited her mother's way with horses. She could gentle the most skittish colt and had a natural understanding of what the animals needed. The twins, Jacob Jr. and Daniel, were 15 and still inseparable. They were wild and fun-loving, but they worked hard and were fiercely protective of their family. They had decided they wanted to be lawmen like their father, and they followed him around when he went into town, learning everything they could. In 1896, Rebecca and Jacob celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. They took a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving it in Tommy's capable hands, and spent 3 days in Kansas City. It was the first time they had been truly alone together in years. "I feel like we are young again," Rebecca said as they walked through the city streets, marveling at the electric lights and tall buildings. "Like we are courting." "You are still as beautiful as the day I met you," Jacob said. "More beautiful, actually. Age has only made you more lovely." Rebecca laughed. "I have gray hair and wrinkles now." "And I love every gray hair and every wrinkle," Jacob said. "Each one is a mark of the life we have built together. They are beautiful to me." That night, in their hotel room, they made love with the passion and tenderness of a couple who had weathered nearly 2 decades together. Afterwards, lying in Jacob's arms, Rebecca said, "I have been alone for so long. Do you remember? That is what I said to you so many years ago." "I remember," Jacob said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "And I promised you would never be alone again." "You kept that promise," Rebecca said. "Every single day for 18 years you have kept that promise. I have never felt alone, not once since you came into my life." "And you never will," Jacob promised. "We have a lifetime ahead of us still, Rebecca. A lifetime of not being alone." They returned to the ranch refreshed and more in love than ever. Life continued its steady rhythm. In 1898, Tommy married a sweet young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the Jensen property and began their own life while still helping run the family business. Grace announced in 1899 that she wanted to attend a veterinary program in Colorado. It was unusual for a woman, but Rebecca and Jacob supported her completely. "You follow your dreams," Rebecca told her daughter. "Never let anyone tell you that you cannot do something just because you are a woman." The twins, true to their word, became deputy sheriffs in 1900, working alongside their father to keep Centralia safe. The town had grown over the years, and having 3 Jensens in law enforcement made everyone feel secure. In 1903, Tommy and Sarah gave Rebecca and Jacob their first grandchild, a baby girl named Rebecca after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake in her arms, Rebecca felt a surge of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. "Look what we made," she said to Jacob, who was peering over her shoulder at the baby with wonder in his eyes. "Look at everything that came from that day in Centralia when a strange cowboy helped me load supplies into my wagon. Best decision I ever made," Jacob said, kissing Rebecca's temple. "Talking to you that day, offering to help, it changed my entire life." "It changed both our lives," Rebecca said. As the new century progressed, the ranch continued to thrive under the combined efforts of the family. Jacob eventually retired as sheriff in 1905, deciding at 50 years old that he wanted to spend more time at home. The twins took over most of the law enforcement duties, and Jacob was content to work the land he loved alongside the woman he adored. More grandchildren arrived over the years. Grace returned from Colorado with her veterinary degree and a husband, a fellow veterinarian named Robert. They settled in Centralia and opened a practice together, but Grace still spent most of her free time at the ranch, working with the horses she loved. The twins both married, Daniel to a school teacher and Jacob Jr. to a young woman who ran the general store. By 1910, Rebecca and Jacob were grandparents to 9 grandchildren, with another on the way. The ranch that Rebecca had once struggled to maintain alone now supported an entire extended family. The main house had been expanded several times, and several new houses dotted the property for the various family members. One evening in the late summer of 1910, Rebecca and Jacob sat in their favorite spot on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. They were both in their late 50s now, their hair gray, their faces lined with the passage of time. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered the storms and celebrated the joys of 32 years together. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night I had dinner at your house?" Jacob asked, taking Rebecca's hand. "You said being able to take care of yourself and being alone were 2 different things." "I remember," Rebecca said. "I was so stubborn then, so determined to prove I did not need anyone." "You did not need anyone," Jacob corrected, "but you chose to let me in anyway. That made all the difference." Rebecca looked out at the ranch, at the houses where their children and grandchildren lived, at the thriving herds and the well-maintained buildings. She thought about the lonely woman she had been, struggling alone, convinced that solitude was strength. She thought about the lonely cowboy who had ridden into town looking for revenge but had found redemption instead. "I was alone for so long," Rebecca said softly. "Years before you came, and in my heart, long before my father died. I felt alone in the world, like I did not quite fit anywhere, like there was no one who truly understood me." "And now?" Jacob asked. Rebecca turned to him, this man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for over 3 decades. She thought about all they had built together, all they had overcome, all the love they had shared and created. "Now I am never alone," she said. "Even when you are in town and I am here on the ranch, even when I am by myself, I am not alone, because I carry you with me, Jacob. Your love, your support, your faith in me. It is always there, always part of me. You kept your promise. I have not been alone for a single day since you came into my life." Jacob's eyes were suspiciously bright. He pulled her close, and they sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Around them, their ranch hummed with life. Inside the various houses, their children were putting grandchildren to bed, starting their own evening routines, living the lives that Rebecca and Jacob's love had made possible. "I love you," Jacob said. "I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Rebecca replied. "You saved me, Jacob." Not from loneliness, really, but from a life without love, without partnership, without knowing what it means to truly share your life with someone. "You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Jacob said. They sat in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds in a dusty Kansas town 29 years earlier. They had faced hardship and danger, drought and fire, loss and grief. But through it all, they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to pass with gentle grace. Rebecca and Jacob grew old together, their love a constant in a changing world. They watched automobiles begin to replace horses in town, watched electricity come to Centralia, watched the world transform around them. But some things never changed. The land they had worked together for decades remained constant. Their love remained constant. In 1915, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with all 4 children and 14 grandchildren present. It was a noisy, chaotic, wonderful celebration. Tommy proposed a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all what love really means. Not the easy kind of love, but the lasting kind. The kind that works hard, that sacrifices, that never gives up. Thank you for showing us how to build a life worth living." "Hear, hear," everyone agreed, and Rebecca felt tears of joy streaming down her face. That night, alone in their bedroom, Jacob held Rebecca close. 37 years, he marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I first saw you in Centralia, diving behind that water trough to avoid getting shot. And sometimes it feels like I have loved you my entire life." "Both things are true," Rebecca said wisely. "Time is strange that way." "You have any regrets?" Jacob asked. "Anything you wish had been different?" Rebecca thought about her life, about the struggles and the triumphs, the sorrows and the joys, about the lonely years before Jacob and the full, rich years after. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Every moment, good and bad, led me to this life with you." "How could I regret any of it? I feel the same way," Jacob said. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "I love you, Rebecca Jensen. I will love you forever." "And I love you, Jacob Jensen, always and forever." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had thousands of nights before, two souls who had found their home in each other. The years grew shorter, as they do when a life is well lived and full of love. Rebecca and Jacob eventually turned over the full management of the ranch to Tommy and his family, though they still helped out when they could and offered advice when it was needed. They spent their days in the house they had shared for decades, tending a garden, raiding, playing with great-grandchildren who began to arrive in the 1920s. In the spring of 1928, 50 years after they had first met, Rebecca and Jacob took a trip back to the spot where it had all started. Centralia had grown and changed, barely recognizable as the small, dusty town it had once been. But the spirit remained the same. They stood on the main street, near where Rebecca had taken cover behind a water trough all those years ago. "If someone had told me that day what my life would become," Rebecca said, "I would never have believed them. I was so lost then, so convinced I would always be alone." "And I was running from ghosts," Jacob said, "chasing revenge instead of peace. Thank God we found each other, Rebecca." "Thank God you gave a strange cowboy a chance." "It was the best decision I ever made," Rebecca said. They stayed in Centralia for 3 days, visiting old friends who were still alive, walking the streets of their shared past, remembering the young people they had been. On their last evening, they attended a town celebration where Jacob was honored for his years of service as sheriff. The current sheriff, Jacob Jr., presented his father with a plaque. "My father taught me that being a lawman is not about power or authority," Jacob Jr. said. "It is about service. It is about protecting people, standing up for what is right, and never backing down from a fight that needs fighting. But more than that, he taught me about love, about being a good husband and father, about building a life that matters. I hope I can be half the man he is." Jacob was too overcome with emotion to do more than nod his thanks. Rebecca squeezed his hand, her own eyes wet with tears. They returned to the ranch renewed and happy, surrounded by the love of their large, boisterous family. The months passed peacefully. Rebecca and Jacob spent their mornings working in their garden, their afternoons on the porch watching the ranch bustle with activity, their evenings reminiscing about their long, rich life together. One evening in October of 1928, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Rebecca and Jacob sat in their usual spot on the porch. Rebecca had been feeling tired lately, and Jacob had been fussing over her, bringing her tea and making sure she had a warm blanket. "You do not need to worry so much," Rebecca told him. "I am just old, Jacob, we both are." "I will always worry about you," Jacob said. "That is part of loving someone, you never stop wanting to take care of them." Rebecca smiled and took his hand. "Do you remember the promise you made me? That first day I told you I had been alone for so long." "I promised you would never be alone again," Jacob said. "And you never have been, not for one day in 50 years. "No," Rebecca agreed. "I have never been alone, not once. You kept your promise, Jacob. Every single day of our life together, you kept your promise." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the ranch they had built together. The land was beautiful in the fading light, golden and peaceful. Inside the various houses scattered across the property, lights began to glow as their family started their evening routines. "We built something good here," Rebecca said softly. "Something that will last long after we are gone." "We did," Jacob agreed. "Together, we built a legacy of love." Rebecca leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the solid comfort of his presence. She thought about the scared, lonely woman she had been at 25, struggling to survive alone on a failing ranch. She thought about the lost cowboy who had ridden into town looking for vengeance, and she thought about how love had transformed them both, had given them a life beyond anything either of them had dreamed possible. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for keeping your promise." "I love you too," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for giving me a home." They sat together as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch settled into its nightly rhythms. In the distance, they could hear their great-grandchildren laughing, their grandchildren calling them in for the night, the gentle sounds of a family at peace. Rebecca felt a deep contentment settle over her, a peace so profound it was almost physical. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not a single moment of joy, but a lifetime of love, carefully built, tenderly maintained, and freely shared. This was what it meant to never be alone. Jacob pulled her closer, and Rebecca closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat, feeling his warmth, knowing that after 50 years together, they were still as in love as they had been that first night when she had whispered that she had been alone for so long, and he had promised she would never be again. It was a promise he had kept every single day. And as the night deepened around them and the stars shone bright overhead, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that it was a promise that would last forever, in this life and whatever came after. Their love story had begun with loneliness and a chance meeting in a dusty Kansas town. But it had become so much more. It had become a ranch full of family, a life full of purpose, a love that had created ripples that would extend far into the future. Their great-grandchildren would tell their own children about Rebecca and Jacob, about the lonely woman and the lost cowboy who found each other and built an empire of love. And on that October evening in 1928, sitting on their porch under the stars, Rebecca and Jacob knew that they had succeeded in the most important thing any two people can do. They had loved each other well. They had kept their promises. And they had proven that no matter how alone someone might feel, love can change everything. The end came gently for both of them, as it should for two people who had lived so fully and loved so completely. Rebecca passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1929, at the age of 76. Jacob, who could not imagine a life without her, followed her just 3 months later, at 73. The town mourned the loss of two of its most beloved members, and the ranch grieved for the couple who had built it from nothing into a thriving legacy. But even in death, Rebecca and Jacob were not alone. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree they had planted together on their first anniversary. Their graves were rarely without flowers, placed there by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the many lives they had touched over their 50 years together. On Rebecca's headstone were the words, "She was never alone." On Jacob's were the words, "He kept his promise." And every year, on the anniversary of their meeting, the family would gather at their graves and tell the story of how it all began. About a cowboy who came to town looking for revenge but found love instead. About a lonely rancher who thought she would always be by herself, but instead built a family that would span generations. About a promise made and a promise kept, and about the transformative power of love. The Jensen Ranch thrived for generations after Rebecca and Jacob were gone, always family-owned, always run with the values they had instilled. The house they had shared was carefully maintained, becoming something of a shrine to their love story. Young couples in the family would ask to spend their wedding nights there, hoping some of Rebecca and Jacob's enduring love would bless their own marriages. Tommy, who took over the ranch after his parents died, made sure to tell his own children and grandchildren about what his parents had taught him. "Love is not just a feeling," he would say. "It is a choice you make every day. My parents chose to love each other every single day for 50 years. That is what made their love special. That is what made it last." Grace, who became one of the most respected veterinarians in Kansas, would tell her students about her mother's determination and her father's gentleness. "My mother taught me that being a woman did not mean accepting limitations," she would say. "And my father taught me that real strength comes from kindness. Together, they taught me what partnership means." The twins, who served as sheriffs well into their 60s, passed on their father's lessons about justice and integrity. "Our father could have become bitter and violent, chasing revenge," they would tell young deputies. "Instead, he chose to build something good. He chose love over hate, creation over destruction. That is the kind of lawman, the kind of man we should all aspire to be." As the decades passed and the 20th century marched on, the world changed dramatically. The ranch adapted, incorporating new technologies and modern methods. But the core values Rebecca and Jacob had established remained constant. Family first, hard work, integrity, and above all, love. In 1978, exactly 100 years after Rebecca and Jacob had met, the family held a massive reunion at the ranch. Over 200 descendants gathered, from babies to great-great-great-grandchildren who were themselves elderly. They stood at Rebecca and Jacob's graves and sang hymns, told stories, and celebrated the love that had created all of them. None of us would be here without them, Tommy's eldest granddaughter said in her speech. Not just in the literal sense, but in every way that matters. This ranch, this family, this legacy of love, it all started with a lonely woman and a lost man who found each other. We carry their love forward every day in how we treat each other, in how we raise our children, in how we live our lives. We are all here because they were never alone. The family ate together, laughed together, shared photographs and memories spanning a century. And as the sun set that evening, painting the Kansas sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, they all gathered on the hill by the oak tree. Someone had brought a recording of an old cowboy song, one that Rebecca and Jacob had loved. As the music played, family members young and old stood together, looking out over the land that had been the foundation of their family's story. "I've been alone for so long," someone quoted softly, repeating the words Rebecca had spoken so many years ago. "But she was never alone again," another voice answered, completing the promise. "And neither are we," a child's voice piped up, "because we have each other. Because of them," someone else added, "because they showed us how to love." As darkness fell and stars began to appear, the family slowly dispersed, heading to their various homes across the ranch property. But the feeling remained, warm and strong and real. The sense that Rebecca and Jacob were still there somehow, their love woven into every stone and tree and blade of grass, their promise still echoing across the decades. They had been two lonely people who found each other in the wild Kansas prairie. They had built a ranch, raised a family, and created a love story that would be told and retold for generations. They had proven that loneliness did not have to be permanent, that even the most lost soul could find home, that love was the strongest force in the world. And in the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the ranch, not the wealth, not even the family itself. Their greatest legacy was the proof that love endures, that promises can be kept, and that no one has to be alone if they open their heart to another. The oak tree continued to grow on that hill, its branches spreading wide, providing shade and shelter. And beneath it, Rebecca and Jacob rested together, their love story complete, their promise fulfilled, their loneliness transformed into a legacy that would never die. They had found each other in 1878 in a dusty Kansas town. They had loved each other for 50 years. And their love continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring couples they would never know, proving to anyone who heard their story that true love was real, that it could last, and that it was worth fighting for. "I've been alone for so long," she had breathed on that first night, vulnerable and scared, and he had promised she would never be again. It was a promise he kept for the rest of their lives. And it was a promise that continued to echo through the generations, a reminder that love could conquer loneliness, that two people together could build something lasting, and that the greatest adventure of all was finding someone to share your life with. Rebecca and Jacob's story was one of courage and commitment, of hard work and tender moments, of building something from nothing through sheer determination and unwavering love. It was a story of the American West, of homesteaders and cowboys, of dusty towns and open prairie. But more than that, it was a story of two human hearts finding each other in the vastness of the world and deciding, against all odds, to build a life together. And that story, that beautiful, heartfelt, true story of love in the Wild West, would never be forgotten.